Christopher Cawley.
Join live Africans United, Know Thyself, Black Power Radio, right here on Oak 93.5, each and every Sunday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., where we discuss solutions to issues affecting Black communities locally, nationally, and globally, with hosts Brother Essence Divine and Brother Asar Amen, with special guests each week. You can follow Africans United, Know Thyself, Black Power Radio on Facebook.com/Oak 93.5, or you can engage in conversation by calling live 919-899-9305. Once again, each and every Sunday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. right here on Oak 93.5.
Peace to the elders, the ancestral giants. Peace to kings and queens and royal families all over. Peace to you, brothers and sisters. You're tuned into Oak 93.5 FM, Africans United, Know Thyself, Black Power Radio, where ancient wisdom meets modern truth, and we speak directly to the souls of people. This is more than a conversation. This is elevation. The mission is empowerment, cultural awakening, and grassroots truth-telling. I'm your host, Essence Divine. Tonight's topic, where we go from here, we're looking at how the system, educational, political, and social, has failed Black people, past and present. This isn't just about bad policies or unfair laws. It's about centuries of design, systems set up to miseducate us, to strip our history, to control our image, and to weaken our unity. But history shows us we've never been powerless. We've had warriors and visionaries, Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Nation of Islam, the Republic of New Africa, and of course the Black Panther Party, movements big and small that dared to educate, feed, protect, and liberate our people. They had a vision, they had discipline, and they understood that freedom is something we build, not something we're given. Tonight we'll be asking what lessons did they leave us, and how do we revive that energy for our generation? And most importantly, where we go from here. I'm joined by my co-host and friend, the founder and CEO of KCSSU, the Honorable Brother Asar Amen.
Anaka Saw, a BB for Hodier, African liberation, Black liberation, African power, Black power, for every Black man, woman, and child on the planet. We are the original people. I am the original man. I am a son of Africa. Peace to the African family that's listening to this broadcast tonight.
And also the brilliant advocate and educator, Dr. Kimberly McTarian.
Good afternoon, everyone listening and watching.
Together, we'll be digging deep into these questions with our special guest, a respected voice in education and community development, Dr. Derrick Sauls.
Good afternoon. It's definitely a blessing to be here today, and now is the time.
Family, before we begin, understand this. This conversation is not about nostalgia. It's about strategy. The past is our teacher, but the future demands our action. Dr. Sauls, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's interesting. I had a marvelous journey, growing up in Goldsboro, North Carolina, to the age of 4, and then going to Boston, Massachusetts, not knowing that I ended up in the hotbed of education for Black people and a legacy of things that had gone on, like with Dr. King coming through Boston, and then we had Howard Thurman coming through Boston, and then we had Elijah Muhammad's son, Wadim Muhammad, coming through Boston. Then we had the illustrious Minister Farrakhan, and then also we have you used to call him Red, who now we know is Malcolm X. He came through Boston, and seeing all that history there and looking at the cavalcade of things that transpired, I grew up understanding what was happening, because with the Black Panther Party and the Mau Mau also being there and just feeding off the fusion of energy that was at that time, and not knowing that it was shaping my destiny until now.
Mm-hmm. The Mau Mau, we spoke on them a little briefly last week. And today what we want to do is, with these guests I have today, and some great guests, may I add that right now, I want to do it more as a panel today instead of just a regular interview. So the questions is for everyone or some questions might just be, and everybody understand how that rolls. To start out, I just want to know, it is important for us to understand as Black people the struggle that we are currently in from a historical political standpoint. On December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton, a member of the Black Panther Party, was brutally assassinated. Chicago, Illinois. Can you share your knowledge on Fred Hampton and his role in the Black Panther movement? Start with you, Dr. Sauls.
Well, it's interesting. That morning that happened, I was in Dudley Station in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and I was already headed to catch the charter bus to go to the middle school. But what we used to do in the morning time is when we would get the newspapers from the Black Panther Party, they would be there handing out the parties, and they was telling us sometimes it's good to have the bullet, but then we had the ballot. But he said even better was education. And that morning that happened, all of a sudden we heard all these screeching wheels where they were being picked up and they were driven off, and we didn't know what was happening with all that excitement. But then we come to find out that the FBI had raided the Black Panther Party in Chicago and all over the United States. They did this multiple raids, and then when they went in and they shot Fred Hampton, it was interesting because with Fred Hampton they found out that he had figured out the key how to unify Chicago, where he got the gangs members to start working together, and even he was going across the bridge talking to some of the Irish and also the Italians in Chicago. I tell everyone to watch the documentary on Fred Hampton, and you'll be surprised that this is a brother who had never been to college, but he was articulate, he understood what was going on, and he knew what the power plays were in the community, how to get the community galvanized together, because we all had the common need of something to eat, education, and a place to stay, and good decent jobs.
Like for y'all to chime in, y'all share y'all knowledge on Brother Fred Hampton also. Dr. Kim?
Well, despite what the media would like to portray regarding not just Brother Fred Hampton, but the Black Panther Party as a whole, their agenda was to liberate African Americans, but not just Black people, but all, for the understanding of what true humanity should look like. We all learned through their examples how devious the government was when it came to divide and conquer, one of the oldest strategies in the world. And America did it quite well. And even today, that is played against us. So many, through my era, we saw more of the gang life of Bloods and Crips, and how we would hear from, I lived in Gary, Indiana, how we would hear about the government putting them against each other, or assassinating one and blaming the other, but it would just be the government all over again. There are no new players to the game, no new strategies, but only new players. And if we look at the life of Brother Hampton, of course, like all of our other leaders, we were on the way to something great and very threatening to the United States of America, and they had to stop that movement, whatever it was and however it was making impact.
And speaking of the government, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI, had established COINTELPRO in 1956 to focus on what he considered threats to U.S. security. He specifically focused on Black leaders and organizations that fought for civil rights. COINTELPRO conducted illegal wiretaps, surveillance, and other crimes that led to the incarceration and murder of innocent people. Can you tell us COINTELPRO role in the assassination of Fred Hampton? And Dr. Kim, you want to start with this one?
No, anyone can.
I'll
Yes.
take that one.
Okay.
The role that the FBI played in the assassination, the murder of Chairman Fred Hampton was gigantic. They were the instrument, basically, that initiated, through COINTELPRO, initiated illegal wiretaps and surveillance on the Black Panthers nationally. They had identified Fred Hampton around 1967, a year after he had graduated from high school, as a 19-year-old young Black man who had the ability to organize and unite people, which was very important. And one of the roles that COINTELPRO played was one of the main focuses was what J. Edgar Hoover considered to be the Black Messiah, the rising of a Black Messiah. And basically what they did were they would pinpoint African American leaders or black leaders who they felt was a threat and bringing black people together. And what Fred Hampton was able to do was incredible because of not only his intelligence and courage, but he reached across racial lines, which was something that was basically new, and was able to bring people together. So he was seen as a threat, just like how they had eliminated a threat two previous threats, who they saw as a threat, Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. So he had a target on his back early. And so what they would do was they had got this young brother who had got in trouble by the name of William O'Neill. And they basically hired him. He became an informant for the FBI. And he joined the Chicago Black Panther Party. And he got close to Chairman Fred Hampton. And he became the head of security. So with him being able to be head of security, he was able to, have surveillance and understand the layout of the apartments and all the other, locations that the Black Panthers would use. So what he did was he got with the attorneys over the Chicago, legal department, and he basically would give them information. And so he gave them information on the layout of the apartment where Fred Hampton stayed with his girlfriend, and where a lot of times they would be there, going over strategies and things of that nature. So with him giving them that type of information, they were able to raid Fred Hampton's apartment and know where everybody was at, and then they was able to assassinate him. And when they shot him up and his girlfriend hollered that she was pregnant, she was 8 months pregnant, they got out of there. And then, her and some of the other Black Panthers party members, they heard the police say, well, is he dead? And after they said that, it was 2 more shots fired, one to the head and one to the chest. And so they played a significant role. And, as we continue this discussion, we'll learn about how, it was discovered the role that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, and COINTELPRO played in the assassination and the murder of Chairman Fred Hampton.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Sauls, you want to share some thoughts on that?
It was interesting because I think it was 1977. I saw the book that the Senate Investigation Committee had released. It was given to me by a guy by the name of Larry Guest at NC State University. He let me borrow it for 3 days, and that 3 days I skimmed through it, and I was reading through it that it was not only Fred Hampton that they were investigating. Anybody that seemed to be a threat, even with Dr. King, they talked about the wiretaps in there, how they had his bedroom wiretap, wherever his hotels wiretapped, and at one time they felt like they had enough evidence on him to tell him, hey, look, you need to step down because we got this evidence, or we're going to go public with it. And it's sad that it gets to that point that when we have credible leaders, they feel like they want to take down our credible leaders with blackmail. But reading that book, COINTELPRO, it led me to the book by Sam Greeley called The Spook Who Sat by the Door, that talks about the first CIA agent. And I read that book also, and in reading that book, it taught me that even while I'm at NC State, I got to learn as much as I can, while I can, about, what is happening while I'm there embedded at NC State, because those same students I'm with at NC State, sooner or later, they're going to be out there and be the leaders, going forward. So it's interesting reading COINTELPRO. Tells you about the systematic progression of how they do these things, and what will happen with us now. We want everything systematic. Even tonight, while we're here talking about this, it's not going to take effect right now, but it's just the beginning of, planting a seed in people's minds for it to grow, for them to understand that the journey is not over, and now is the time.
Yeah, and so the Black Panther Party was formed in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, 2 revolutionaries dedicated to protection and upliftment of our people. They developed a 10-point program that outlined the party's demands and goals for social justice and equality. This program served as foundational document for the Black Panther Party and continues to resonate in discussions. Why was the government so intent on destroying the Panther, and who provided positive, impactful programs and initiatives for Black communities nationwide?
I can answer that because first of all, they marched and in California on the courthouse steps carrying weapons. And that's when all of a sudden they realize that, hey, we got to make these carrying weapons in public unlawful, because it shows too much power and it gives power. But anybody, I'm from that old age of of the black community, where we always, if nothing else, we had an old shotgun behind the front door. We always knew that we had to protect ourselves. So when it comes to the black community, guns and and rifles and stuff is nothing new. It's just the fact that we haven't taught our younger generation the art of warfare. Is that when you pull one out, it's only when you get ready to use it. You just don't walk around here acting like you big bad because you got a gun. And so what happened is that when they looked at the Black Panther Party and showed that just seeing the figure of a black man with a weapon, it really bothered them, because I was reading on Francis Wesseling's book when it was talking about the handgun and the symbol of the handgun. It was like a symbol of power. And I started reading, putting all this stuff together, and this is being orchestrated. And the irony is that this was all orchestrated before we had the modern technology, where people are still writing books by hands. But now we fast forward this modern technology and looking at how can there be an assault. And what happened is they seeing that the Black Panther Party can resurge quick and easy, because it's still been carried on when it comes to warfare in the community and guns in the community. But now they're just labeled by different colors that you wear, Crips gangs, Latin Kings, things of that nature. There is a militia force in the black community, but they gotta shut it down, because they would never be able to control it, because that's why they're trying to put all these gun laws in. That's why North Carolina right now is running scared and just passed where you're 18, you can carry a gun now without a permit and things of that nature, because there's fear of the black community. Because what happens if all of a sudden we wake up and say, hey, look, no, y'all not gonna do that anymore. I'm sorry, I'm gonna protect my grandmama, my mama, my aunt, my my nieces, my daughters. We rise up as men and really say, hey, look, enough is enough, and now is our time. That we ain't asking you for a whole lot. All we asking you for is, like they said, we want freedom, and with freedom it comes with a cost.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear y'all thoughts on that also. But I want to share this 10-point program that they did put in place with the listeners out there, some who may not know them. First, it says we want freedom, the right to determine the destiny of the black community. 2, we want full employment, the right to work and earn a living. 3, we want an end to the robbery of the black community. We want control of the economy by the community. We want decent housing. Number 4, the right to safe and affordable housing. 5, we want education, an education that teaches the true history and role of black people in society. 6, we want an immediate end to police brutality, the right to self-defense against police violence. 7, we want freedom for all black men, release of all black prisoners, and an end to the unjust legal system. 8, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. Basic human rights for all. 9, we want a United Nations, a global platform to address the issues faced by black people. 10, we want an end to the oppression of black people, a call for justice and equality for all. Those were the 10 points, and it don't seem like they're asking for too much to me. I'd like to hear y'all like to share some thoughts on this also.
Well, I think what we are hearing is something that sounds simple. It should be something that America by now should specialize in giving every citizen. But we have to remember that we are foreign agents of America. We are not citizens. We want to believe that we are, because that is how they court us. They court us into believing that we are one nation under God, but we are the most contentious citizens they've ever had. Since the day we got here, we fought them. So either we're one nation or we're two nations. And we have to be realistic that the reason why they're dead, the reason why our leaders just come up dead, is because we are not a part of their society. The only way that we really show that we are part is when we comply with the lie.
Nice.
And anybody that goes against the lie of any, Fred Hampton was asking for things that he saw other citizens have. But as soon as we demonstrate that that liberty, or the freedom to protect our families and the freedoms to have decent housing, or to display what their militias display every day, then we all of a sudden become a problem, or we become problematic. We talk about displaying just, Martin Luther King did nonviolent protests, and he still was murdered. So we're really not even talking about weaponry. We're talking about ownership. We're talking about who owns who and who owns the narrative.
Wow. Chattel slavery.
We're back where we started. We never went anywhere. And what African Americans, Black, the diaspora across the nation, across the globe, have to say is that we're dealing with sociopaths. Not, why would you want to be included? Why are you trying to fit in? You never will. Now, what do we do with that? I love the question. Where do we go from here? Well, first of all, we have to come to a day of reckoning in our own brain that we are not a part of what they keep promising us. The reason why it's always a promise and a dream and never a reality is because it was never supposed to be a reality, and we'll never be good enough. But good enough for who?
Right. And what you're saying, I got my hands on National Security Memorandum 46. I want to share that also, a little bit of it, but I'll get into that in just a moment. She was mentioning, like, just knowing global unification, and global unification for all African people is one goal of Pan-Africanists. In 1945, Pan-African Conference was historic. At the conference, it was decided that mass movements and mass organizing and organizations were needed on the continent of Africa to fight and counter colonialism. Excuse my talking right now, and imperialism, and for Africans in the diaspora to organize and fight for liberation. The fight against racism and negative legacy of slavery for this conference came independence and the African countries in the late 50s and early 60s. What impact did this conference have on the civil rights movement? And Brother Saul, I'd like for you to start here.
Yes, it had a great impact on the civil rights movement and all other mass movements globally. It's important to understand that the 1945 Pan-African Conference was its fifth one. And basically, like we had discussed last week, the United Nations was formed in 1945. And the reason why this Pan-African Conference was so important, right, because they understood the planning and organizing of the European nations and the United Nations as far as to continue to control Africa and its resources and its minerals, and basically the people and the government. We discussed a few weeks ago about, the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885. So our Pan-African leaders, they were intelligent enough to understand that to fight this global Eurasian imperialism, that it would take mass movements, right? So the civil rights movement basically came, because of, brothers like, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and others who stood up, for black people in their rights. And as far as the Black Panthers and their 10-point program is concerned, those young brothers and sisters, they deserve a lot of respect and honor for having the intelligence and the courage, right, to understand the necessity for us to organize and make sure that we have proper education for our children and our adults, that they get the proper nutrition, right, proper housing, to be able to have jobs where they can support themselves and support the families. So in 1945, the great African leaders that was at that conference, they knew that this is a long-term strategy that we must have, and so that we can overthrow white supremacy. Like, so the Black Panther movement was very, very instrumental, and I think it's important for us to understand this too, right? Because these brothers and sisters in the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Fred Hampton, right? They took it a step beyond the civil rights movement, because when the civil rights movement bill was passed, a lot of people looked at that as a victory. But yet these brothers and sisters understood that that was just one step, right? That we have to really fight for human rights for our brothers and sisters so that we can stop the oppression, stop the exploitation. And I think it's important for us to take a page out of the Black Panthers book, as we have done at KCSSU, and understand the value of properly educating our children from a historic perspective and also from a scientific perspective based on the knowledge of self, which we know is the basis of all true knowledge, right? And so this is where that movement was leading, Black Power, Black Pride. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with Stokely Carmichael. If not, look him up. He was a part of the Black Panther movement and other organizations, and he was the one that coined the term Black Power. So I think it's very important for us to understand the significance of the Black Panther and what they was able to do. And as we continue this discussion, we'll understand exactly the government's role in trying to dismantle one of our great organizations.
Food, clothing, and shelter. Like I said, we ain't asking you to give it to us. Just get off our bat so we can, create it on our own. Civil rights movement, I heard a lot of speak on that. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Was a prominent figure in the civil rights movement. But also we had figures like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X with the Nation of Islam, and Stokely Carmichael, who you just mentioned, a freedom fighter. They was all targeted by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI as possible black messiahs. I heard Brother Saw mention that earlier. Why, in your opinion, would a government target its own citizens? And can a government like that be trusted? I would like to hear.
Well, when it comes to things like, why did the government target them? It's like anything else. If you want to keep, people in suppression, what you do is they always have this phrase, in order to control, a snake, you got to cut the head off. So basically they felt like if they cut the head off, of Dr. King, Malcolm X, that, the movement would stall. The only problem we had that when Dr. King was assassinated, there should have been at least 100 more disciples to take his place.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm always trying to invigorate younger people between the age of 35 and 40, and 45, to tell them, hey, look, you need to take my place. You need to stand up and show out. I understand chasing that dollar is very good, but that by them getting you to chase that dollar, get all those credit cards, get all that debt, you become a slave to the financial aspect of society. Because I found out later on, when I had all these credit cards and all this debt, I had no freedom at all to do what I need to do and say what I need to say. Because they would come in and say, hey, look, I got this letter saying, you're not credible. So we're going to, even though you got an 800 credit score, we still can't fund this. And I'm like, what's going on here? But it lets you know that there's still a system where now with even artificial intelligence, that they got their finger right on the pulse. And like Elon Musk showed that they can just hit a keystroke and take you right on out the system. So now we're at a point that, they're trying to figure out who is the next up and coming leader. And that's why it's very important, to educate the younger people. And, even if it's nothing but planting the seed, let them think about themselves. Don't get rid of books, create libraries in our houses, things of that nature. Because if you got everything on a smartphone, they can shut a smartphone down when they get ready. But if you got that book in that house and that child gets bored one day and just happen to pick the book up, because what happened with me is, I wasn't really into the movement at all until one day I stopped in Alexandria, Virginia, and was visiting my cousin, and I got in trouble. So my dad told me, hey, look, you go in the living room and, and until we get ready to leave, you can't even socialize with the family. So I went in there and she had all these books. So I pulled this book down by Lerone Bennett that came before the Mayflower. And I'm like, what is this? What are they talking about? Who are the Africans? Who sailed across here before, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, Christopher, who came here before the Pilgrims? All of a sudden it sparked in me an interest to start reading. All of a sudden I took a passion. When I got back to Boston, when I get in high school, I took an African class about Africa. My teacher said, hey, look, I think it was 1970. He was saying, look up, there's a rising guy over in Africa named Omar Gaddafi. He's taking over Libya. He's coming and he's talking the stuff they need to talk. And he also said, look at how they assassinated Patricia Lumumba, which is interesting because now Britain just sent his gold tooth back. That they had. That's all they got left of him is a gold tooth. They sent it back to his family to bury this gold tooth. And see, then we talk Jomo Kenyatta. Then we was, and I'm looking at all this, and they were talking about Mandela and Biko. And then all of a sudden, I'm finding out when I got in college, Steve Biko was in the back of a truck. And they're driving around, and had him slamming him around, and said, "Oh, he hit his head while he was in the truck." All of a sudden, I started seeing this systematic, dismantling, of black intelligence, by killing them off. And it's like, why did they kill them off? Then I started reading, and it was like, oh, wow, a lot of these guys came to Virginia State, Virginia Union, Howard University. They came here and got educated in America. Now they went back to their countries. They showed them, how to, decolonize their countries and take it to the next level. And now they said, we got to get rid of these guys. We can't have that. Even like when it came to the guy in Cuba, Fidel Castro. This dude was brilliant. He was at Columbia University. He got taught by the best. So you get taught by the best, you learn what's happening with them. Just like when I was at NC State, the night when they played Roots and Kunta Kinte's foot got chopped off, you'd have thought that was the night that NC State beat Carolina. Those guys came out there throwing toilet paper all over the trees. When Chuck Connor chopped that foot off, I'm looking at all this, and it just said to myself, they're just waiting. They're just waiting. So that's why I've always been about this liberation movement. I sit down, people say, oh, man, you're a sellout. No, I'm not a sellout. If I didn't go to NC State, if I didn't go to Harvard, if I didn't go to Duke, if I didn't go to if I didn't go to these PWIs, I wouldn't know what's being taught there. I would, I had my pulse on it. And then at the same time, these are the people going to be in charge. That's where we got to educate our children. That even if our leaders are assassinated, you're next in line. And we're not teaching our kids they're next in line. I will teach my children, if you don't do it, who going to do it? And that's where we at.
True.
Very important.
So, y'all like to share any thoughts on why the government target our citizens? And can we trust a government like this?
Well, I think it's important for us to ask the question, who is the American government?
That's a great one.
Yes.
Who? When we talk about even the world in itself, when they look upon America, do they see a multicultural base country, or do they see what we really are experiencing, which is dominant white supremacy? With a very strong system of finances, a very strong indoctrinated system of education. What parts do we really have? And what are they together? What do they encompass? And I believe that is the question that we really don't want to answer. Because we're working so hard to assimilate it, we can't go against it. So if you're going through the institutions that teach you how to get through it, how to become like them, how you can't fight what you have joined yourself to. You went to school from K to 12, and now you graduate, and that is a big accomplishment, and now you're going to go to the next level where either you become like them or you become an enemy. And so those are the things that we're teaching our children more to how to survive, how to become like the lie. As long as you're successful, they have a little entertainment that sort of smooths out those rough edges. We have nationalism. We have football. We have every national sport, and then they give us the Olympics. So then, we saw that duality along the 60s and 70s with Muhammad Ali saying, "Do I even want to be your champion?" Because what I'm really experiencing at home is disgusting. So how long are we going to mask America? And that is up to the African American population to make that defining moment. Because remember now, they've silenced the natives.
Yes.
You can't go 30 miles from here and almost find a native anywhere. So the only group that's really left that's not saying, hey, we came here because we wanted to be here, is the African American population. And if we don't stand and say this is hypocrisy, this is an illusion of inclusion, And really, it is dangerous to want to be with this, what they call the nation. You cannot fight it. Because first of all, they've taught us that in order for you to live here, you have to succumb or subject yourself to the lie. And we'll pay you great if you can do that.
Some great, interesting points. Just even the final one, in order to live here, subjugate yourself. How you say that to the lie?
Get in where you fit in.
Get in with, and how many of our politicians, African Americans, actually we elect them to represent us, but they then become a part of the problem. They get in where they fit in, and then they get totally quiet on our issues. How can you have this long of gentrification, mass incarceration, every other alien disease of America, but you have, in Wake County alone, we have a black chief of police. We've had 3 of them back to back. Black county manager, black city manager, black assistant city manager, black sheriff, 2 black sheriffs. We have all of what we need, quote unquote, to be included, to change. But our numbers still look like we are in a deficit. We look worse than those who are immigrants. That's because in order for you to be successful, you must comply with the lie. And if you don't, yes, you will be targeted.
And we've had a black mayor in Raleigh, Clarence Lightner.
Yes, sir.
And then they went after his children, because his children didn't get in line. They said, oh, they were doing all this off the wall stuff, and it was really interesting because it was in the mid '70s when he was mayor, of Raleigh, and they went after him. And after that, it's just kind of weird how all of a sudden we never had anybody rise to prominence. And if they did, what they did is they moved the goalposts. All of a sudden now they said, okay, we're gonna make all the new development outside 440, outside the belt line, so that way we can get a more concentrated area of voting and control, city council and things of that nature. But it makes me wonder because we had John Winters, who was buying up a lot of property. He was telling the younger generation, buy this, buy that, because it's all about the property. And then the sad thing about it, through some dysfunctionality in his family, a lot of his gains that even he made, people, matter of fact, on Blunt Street and all that stuff you see up down there, he owned a lot of that land down there. But it was somehow or another it was taken out of his family's ownership. How, I don't know. But we never followed through. Where we blacks in Raleigh should have had more land. But then when they did have land like the 4th Ward, they put Wilmington Street straight through it and made the black churches and the people displaced and move. So that used to be all predominantly black area over there. That's why you see these black houses on one side and on the other side. And like any major area in a city, they put a highway all the way through it. Like in 147 in Durham, they went right straight through basically what I would call our Tulsa of North Carolina. Because, right there, Durham was known for being progressive and having money.
Yes.
It was, it was very, prominent at that time. And they put 147 right straight through it. And so even in Boston, they put Melnea Cass Boulevard right straight through Raleigh. Not Raleigh, but Roxbury. They have these ways of putting these roads through there. And sometimes I'm beginning to wonder, is it a form of crowd control? Because England was the first ones, to start doing that because they had such a, immigrant population from the islands because they had dual citizenship from the Caribbean islands that whenever they have an enclave of, predominantly black neighborhoods, they will build a highway around it. And so if you go and get a drone or get a map and look at the projects in England, how they have this highway around it, all of a sudden you'll see how all of a sudden they split our communities to divide us. Because we had a lot of mom and pop stores that were doing real well on Wilmington Street downtown. They came in and they cut it out. And then they tell everybody, oh, you don't need these mom and pop stores. Now you go to Crabtree. You go to Crabtree, we got these up and coming stores in Crabtree. So we say, okay, we go to Crabtree. Then you go to Crabtree, you walk in the store, somebody walking behind you. Can I help you? You better watch them, look in their pockets, check their pockets. When all of a sudden the tractor trailers are coming up and then, the stuff ain't even making it into the store and they don't see that.
Right.
So, we got this duality, man, of, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. That's a phrase that's coined. And so I don't know. It's interesting. And like I tell my children, I never thought I would see a day like today Where every day you got to wake up and say, okay, what's the agenda today? What's getting cut out today? What's happening today? Where am I at? Who am I? But the only major problem is that they're getting caught up with the browning of America, where all of a sudden they say, hey, look, there's too many, brown and indigenous people here.
Yeah.
They taking over. So let us go and tell the Supreme Court to repeal Roe versus Wade. So all of a sudden, instead of them getting rid of them babies, they'll start having more of them babies that look like them. And that's where we at. It's interesting. Nobody see the chess game that's being played. 40 years from now, they'll figure it out. But during that time period, hey, I'm not Benjamin Button, so I don't think I'm gonna reverse in my age.
I heard about the Lightner guy before, but I only heard funeral home story on him. So I did not know that he was once mayor.
Yeah, he was a mayor. He was good. He was good.
Absolutely.
And I also read about the when Durham was thriving.
Oh yes.
But I did not know, and I just I did not know about the way they building them roads and stuff through
straight through.
Yeah, that's interesting right there. I'm gonna have to get back and check other cities out.
It's a subtle form of called redlining.
Yeah,
they put the road through there, and then when you want to develop, you want to renovate your house. Oh no, I'm sorry, your property value is not what it should be. And then they flip the script like they did in Raleigh, where all of a sudden downtown, a lot of them little row houses were only worth maybe about $5,000. Then they come in there and they buy it, bulldoze off, and put $400,000 to $500,000 house there.
Yeah.
First they changed the tax value. They doubled the tax value.
Tax value. When
I'm outside Raleigh. All of a sudden my tax value went down a couple of dollars. And my house is practically was born in was built in in 2022. But the values the tax value went down a couple percentage points. But then it's going up in Southeast Raleigh, and that's all by design. Those people can't afford on $500,000 a month welfare check or a Social Security check to maintain. Because they come through, so now you got to fix this up, fix that up.
Design.
It's a design.
Yeah.
But we can fight our way through it. But I'll end up on that because it's a trifecta that I want to bring about how we can make this thing work.
Right. And like you said, then they also put up big big name stores and all, and they push all the little mom and pop stores out or whatever. And but it's always violence against our leaders, and that's a tactic used by white supremacists and global Eurasian imperialists, and it's used to paralyze and scare us into non-action. Malcolm X was murdered in 1965, Dr. King 68, Fred 69, like was mentioned. Those are all who fought for the rights of black people. In your opinion, what lessons do we take from these three great men? And how should we educate our children and communities on these facts?
Well, was it another part of that question?
No.
Right. Well, I think it's important, for us to understand, right, when you look at, for one, the colonization of the African countries and the murder of Patrice Lumumba in 1961. And then here in the United States, Malcolm X in 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968, and in 1969, Fred Hampton, right? These were all freedom fighters, right? And I think it's important for us to understand that a freedom fighter is always fighting for African liberation and justice, right? And so this is something, and this is not just the government here in the United States, but when we talk about global Eurasian imperialism or white supremacy, and we talk about the United Nations, we understand that their goal and objective is to be able to control Africa and its people and black people wherever we are on the planet. Now, it's interesting because the way COINTELPRO was exposed was because of a break-in into an FBI office on March 8th, 1971, which just happened to be the same night that Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier. And it was really big, and they felt like it would be a great opportunity because the country and the world would be focused on that fight to break into the FBI office. And the reason why, and they called themselves the Citizens Committee of Investigating the FBI. It was 8 of them. They started off with 9 of them. And the reason why they wanted to break in and get the FBI files was because they were anti-war, anti-Vietnam War, right? So most of these people were Europeans. I think all of them were Europeans, right? So that was their main goal and objective, right, was to get documentation to show what the FBI was doing. And when they broke in, they were successful, right? They never got caught. But now they're making documentaries, writing books, and giving stories about the break-in. Because what they was able to discover was the intentionality, the deliberate, right, crimes that the FBI was committing, led by J. Edgar Hoover. Now, it's important to understand that the FBI was so powerful at the time that even the president and all other government officials feared them. So when they broke in and they got all these files, documents, and correspondences, they saw how one of the major focuses of the FBI and COINTELPRO was to basically sabotage, disrupt, and destroy any black leaders, all black organizations in the black communities in itself. And one thing, in the documents that they read was how the FBI, they wanted to enhance paranoia in the black community. They wanted to enhance paranoia with the black leaders and organizations by having them think that every corner that they turned, they were going to see an FBI agent, right? So you know what this type of paranoia does, right? It makes you discombobulated. Also, one of the things that was in the documents was that they wanted to assign 6 informants to every FBI agent, and they were to report to the FBI agents every other week. And this is how they was able to get William O'Neill, basically, because he had got a minor charge and he didn't want to go to jail, to infiltrate the Black Panther Party in Chicago and set Fred Hampton up. So I think when the Citizens Committee of Investigating the FBI pulled off this heist, right, and saw all the documents and saw how they targeted the black community and its black leaders, right, what they did was they got in contact with the Washington Post, and they decided to start, sending them documentations. And when they started sending them documentations, the first thing they did, the Washington Post, was, they wanted to share the information, with some congressmen and things of that nature who wanted to turn it back over to the FBI without even dealing with it. But the Washington Post, at 10 o'clock that night, they decided to go on through and release the story, with some of the evidence and things of that nature, which was overwhelming. It was so overwhelming where now the FBI had a target on its back for its corruption, with them being one of the, biggest and most feared, agencies in government. So COINTELPRO, they had to disband that in 1971 because of all the heat. But what this was able to show was the illegal activities of the United States government. And the ones who was going after the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, right, they were full aware of all the illegal wiretaps and everything, but they had to try to cover, their tails. And that's why they disbanded COINTELPRO. And I think that, as we continue, with this broadcast, we'll see that just because they disbanded COINTELPRO didn't mean that the United States government was through with its shenanigans of surveillancing its citizens, wiretapping its citizens, and committing all kinds of illegal crimes and acts against the black community.
Right. I think they just changed the name from COINTELPRO to something else. Y'all want to share some thoughts on how we can educate our children on those facts about the violence of how they was assassinating our leaders. And while y'all do that, if y'all feel free to, I wanna try to pull up the National Security Council memorandum.
Let me add something.
At the time.
Let me add something about the fear, because I think that's important, right? Because when they murder our leaders, right? We had Brother Mac with us last week, the brother from Nigeria, and we was talking about how the first time he was on the show when Patrice Lumumba was killed. And he said that threw Congo back 100 years.
Yes.
And now we can still see the conflict in Congo. And really, when you look at the fact that Congo has 910 different political parties, it lets you know the unrest that they have there.
That's true.
And the constant conflict, right?
That's good.
So you look at Chicago, Illinois, right? With the gang activity, and all the other, crime and I'm not blaming our communities or our people, right? But you look at how, and you got the Nation of Islam there, but you look at the chaos and confusion in Chicago and the murder of somebody like, Chairman Fred Hampton, who was able to galvanize and organize. And what that does is, when they murder our young leaders, it put fear where we get to thinking that, we can't accomplish, but we can accomplish. And it's important for us to teach our children, like we do at KCSSU, Brother Essence, truth, justice, and righteousness. That we teach them high values, we teach them principles. We teach them that we have to understand as a people that we are second to none. And we cannot accept this institutional systemic racism and white supremacy and sweep it under the rug because we feel like they might murder us. We have got to teach our children that they have to be fearless, courageous, intelligent, and they got to have the spirit in order to continue the work that our ancestors have been doing for thousands of years of fighting the enemy.
Can I?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Let me say that I hear my brothers say they assassinated our leaders. Why do they come after our leaders? Because our leaders were leading. They were leading in a particular region with a particular people. These are invaders. It's very, I believe that we are in a cognitive dissonance when we begin to speak a dual language. One minute we say that they killed the natives, they imprisoned, placed them on reservations, genocide.
Right.
And in the same language, we'll say, and we are American. Either we are, if we call ourselves American, then what we're saying is that we are co-conspirators with those who came and assassinated the natives. What difference is a reservation than mass incarceration? You just put one on a plantation and put one, who puts
in the reservation.
Yeah. Absolutely. So America, quote unquote, is no different than what they did to the leaders in Africa. When they invaded Africa, when they infiltrated and they took over and dismantled, that is a war crime.
Carved it up.
Carved it up. Give it to different other countries and their quote unquote leaders. That is a war transaction. What more is the land that we stand on today but a war transaction? Why are we calling ourselves members or citizens of a society who committed war crimes?
Yes.
And if it was a war crime then, it is a war crime now. Now, just because they made it look very lustrous, they allowed us to, and let me say this, they allowed, a word called allowed is also the word law. The only way that they could actually allow is to make it lawful. If we do not have law in this country to hold back white supremacy, we will be on the back of the bus. We won't be on the bus. Anything that we've done has taken a law to hold white supremacy in place. Citizens don't need that. That means we're at war constantly. The reason why we are suffering mentally, physically, economically is because we're in small battles. The things that our ancestors fought in the 60s, we're still fighting.
Microaggressions.
Thank you, sir. Microaggressions today because we're constantly in warfare that we don't want to call war. Nobody wants to accept the fact that we are
At war.
at war. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I
A lot
add
of people-
something right quick? Because it was something that Dr. Kim said as far as the law is concerned, how they have the law intact to protect white supremacy and institutional systemic racism. I think it's important for all of us to understand who Derrick Bell is, right? Derrick Bell was an attorney. He was also a scholar, right? And at one point, he was a professor at Harvard Law School, right? But he basically, in a sense, stepped down because, he was fighting for the rights of tenureship, for one of his colleagues. But he is the one who basically they consider to be the father of critical race theory, right? And critical race theory is very important because what Dr. Kim just spoke about, how they have laws to protect their injustices, is what he was pointing out. That in the very fabric of this society and within this law and within the Constitution, right, it shows the negative impact that it has on black people or African Americans or Africans here in America, right? So, when the George Floyd incident happened, right, and the critical race theory was very prevalent and prominent in the news, and, the government made it a point, right, to shut that down, to even, outlaw some of the books, that he wrote on critical race theory. And it's so strong where you don't even hear attorneys talking about Derrick Bell. And I think that, his work really needs to be looked at and investigated, by some freedom fighters who basically kind of, look into law to see exactly what it was that he was saying. Because that's one thing that they don't want us to study. Because he was taking another angle as far as, being able to liberate black people.
I want to, and before we move on, I want to share this document. This document is Exhibit 10 of U.S. Supreme Court case number 00-9587. This is National Security Council Memorandum 46. And the brother said that the COINTELPRO was exposed, what was that, 1971? Correct. During the fight when when our people is entertained. Right. So this was sent out March 17th, 1978, 7 years later. President Review Memorandum to Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and Director of Central Intelligence. Subject, Black Africa and the U.S. Black Movement. The President has directed that a comprehensive review be made of current developments in Black Africa from the point of view of their possible impacts on the Black movement in the United States. The review should consider, and I won't go through the whole document, it might just be too long, but I want to give some points out there because it's I think it's pertinent for us to go through some of this. One, long-term tendencies of social and political developments and the degree to which they are consistent with or contradict the U.S. interests. And yeah, they want to understand basically what it says. It says what Dr. Kim was just saying. If we don't comply, then we contradicting the U.S. Interests, and this could cause for some.
That's why Farrakhan had to give that $5 million back to Omar Gaddafi.
He had to give it back.
He had to give it back.
Wow.
Security issue, they said.
So, 2, proposals for durable contacts between radical African leaders and leftist leaders of the U.S. Black community.
That's because of South Africa. South Africa problem, that Krugerrand was very strong. And it was interesting that you mentioned that because you got to remember in 1978, Jimmy Carter was in power. He was the president in 1978,
That's right.
which that is really totally puzzling to me because if you read the autobiography of Jimmy Carter and understand, his mother used to drop him off at night with this black lady. He grew up with a black lady in Georgia. Nobody really knew that until, I think it was published last year about when he was growing up. He had an affinity for black people like anything else. They'll grow up and they have an affinity But when it comes to the powers and the pressures, to be, sometimes they would cave into stuff. But I think that is why Jimmy Carter spent the rest of his life trying to make amends, because he saw things like that happen. Because if you remember when it came to the struggles in South Africa didn't really succumb until all of a sudden, you started getting the blacks in America, and also they galvanized a lot of the corporations to say, hey, look, we're not buying, stock from companies that are, we call them social conscious stocks. We're not buying stocks from companies that are supporting South Africa. So then they started putting that economic pressure on Harvard, Columbia, and places of that nature. Started looking at the endowments and stopped, deleting stocks. So all of a sudden, South Africa was losing money behind that. And I think the thing that took it over, the pendulum, was that 4 years those kids walked out the classroom. And then, left school and started striking because they couldn't go over there and start bombing the kids and shooting them down in the street. And the problem with that is that all of a sudden now you have 4 years of kids that became illiterate. They couldn't go into the job force. They weren't going to school for 4 years. Who was teaching them?
Right.
Same scenario on COVID. You sitting back waiting for a kid to come up and dial in on this, TV screen or computer to get his lesson. It's not going to happen.
Nah.
The structure wasn't there. So that pressure with, the blacks in America, putting that pressure on them, and then you have people that, still that were involved subtly in the movement. You didn't have the Harry Belafontes or some of the other prominent blacks at that time, to come out and push the forefront. But you had some that were behind the scene. That all of a sudden were the first vanguard that went to Brown University, Harvard University, Yale. People that nature that now were in corporate America, that were in the boardrooms. They weren't the chairman of the board, but they were there to say, hey, look, you need to take another look at this. Because all of a sudden now, what happens if black people get upset and start boycotting? Because they knew what happened in Montgomery with the boycott. Right. So now the United States has to look at an overall boycott. Same scenario as Jamal Heston Bryant. Suppose it becomes a situation where all of a sudden it said, hey, let's make this a global thing. Where the money, all of a sudden we're going to find out really how much we do, our values and our true value.
That's true.
So that's what happened. They didn't want that, that back and forth, because right now, if you want to really make Africa free, tell all, do like the Chinese. The Chinese say, hey, look, we got all these people in medicine and engineering that, that have gone over to the United States, and they're like second generations. Hey, let's tell them, them and their parents, hey, you can come on back and have dual citizenship. Tell their children, you can have dual citizenship with China. Your parents are Chinese. We'll give you dual citizenship. Not your MD. You're working at Duke. You're working at Stanford. You're working at in Los Alamos, Texas, on the atomic bomb, and you're working in in CDC and all these. You have positions in all these universities. Bring that technology over here to China. We're not mad at you. It's something about when the turtle always goes back to where it's supposed to. That's the name of it. Now, suppose all the blacks that are educated here, even like with myself, if I was to go back and say, all right, I'm going back to Ghana, Kenya, Burkina Faso for 2 years and just teach, what I know. And all of a sudden we have a mass migration for a couple years. It'd be just like Ghana telling France, hey, look, we don't need you to process our cocoa anymore and sell it back to us. Right. We're going to do it ourselves. And they told China, we don't, don't send us any more engineers. We're going to have our own engineers. That's where all of a sudden you're going to find out they're going to like, wow, this thing's getting critical. Because look at Tulsa. Look at Rosewood, look at Wilmington. When we were in charge of Wilmington, they ran us out. The guy in charge of News and Observer got the Ku Klux Klan. They all got together and went down there and said, we're going to run everybody out of there. Run them all out. And then we going to take over. If you were that good beforehand, why didn't you take over it beforehand? Why just use the ballot? You're there, but why'd you have to use the gun? And that's what it is. We can do this.
We can.
We can do this.
Absolutely. But first, we all got to realize that we're all at war.
But that's why we got to educate. We got to teach our kids how to read. And that's why when we sum this up, I got those 3 points called the trifecta I'm going to talk about.
Right. And speaking of education for African-American children, in the United States, historically, the education system has failed our children and communities. Many times they blame the black parents, unfortunately, and for the low performance of the students. I guess what can we do as a community to assist those parents and children who need assistance with education? And how can we help to equip our parents to help our children?
It's funny you mentioned that. Since 1976, I've been working on a literacy program, and I just fell into it by accident because I couldn't afford a membership at the YMCA in Boston. So what I did is I told them, I said, they said, well, we can do this. If you go and you spend an hour and a half working with these kids, testing them for literacy, then you can get a free membership for the summer. So I spent an hour and a half with this third grade literacy test, testing these children. All of a sudden, I'm looking at these kids 10, 11, 12 years old, and they couldn't read. And all of a sudden, I started looking at the cadence of how they learn, to read, and then at the same time why they were not reading. And so I went and fast forward. All of a sudden, when I came back here in the early 1990s, they had a program called Male Alliance for Life Extension, which was with the March of Dimes. It was with Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Wake County School System, and the Department of Public Health, where we would go in there and we would work with the young men in the middle school, ironically from pregnancy prevention, because they're going to adolescence. But at the same time, we were teaching them and working with them. And in the process of looking at that structure and what was going on, we had an organization called APPIA, African American Parents in Wake County. They were pulling together because these kids were being sent to these schools and they weren't getting a support structure. I work with what they call the Friends of Distinction, which was started by Dr. Marjorie Dedman. She got sick one year, and when I was a senior at NC State, she asked me would I work with these young men because she couldn't do it. Come to find out, she started this organization because one of the young men in the original organization, his dad was executed in North Carolina because they said he raped this woman in the Belt Building downtown on the elevator. And they kept saying, he didn't do it, but back then, so this young man was going through, and that's when they integrated the school system in Wake County. So you had all these black males going to, Enloe, to Sanderson, to Broughton, schools that used to be predominantly white. All of a sudden they're there, but they needed a support structure because they were playing football. Like there was like Willie Burden. He was from Raleigh. I forget the other guy's name to play football. Charlie Young. They came through, but they went to NC State and they played NC State. Yeah. So I play football state. That's why I know about them. So I'm looking at the whole scenario about okay, you can come into our educational system, but we want you there because you can play the sport. But when we finish with you, it's all over. So so when I'm working with these young men called the FOD, what they would do, we were bringing them in and we were working with them. During the year, grooming them, getting them ready for college, and teaching them that, hey, look, you at Enloe, you at Broughton, you at Sanderson, but you at a school, then you're a school within a school, and you gotta govern yourselves accordingly. You gotta be on that that edge to learn. So all of a sudden, I found out there were, in the early 90s, there were black organizations in the community that was working with their kids. Now we fast forward, where are they? It was people age out. Like I know I aged out. I don't have that bandwidth to go back and do all that stuff all over again. That's why, when I work with kids now, as you see, are you seeing one of the project we're working on? Right. I tell the kids, hey, look, what's going on? No, you plan it. I'm not planning it. Yes. You hold the board. I'll drill it, but you hold the board. You go, you put the cardboard down. You do the work. Right. That way it's called immersion. They work through it. They become sweat equity. They become a part of it. They take ownership. We're not teaching our kids to take ownership of their, of learning, because about 25 years ago, it was the first time, if you go look at statistics, that where you had, high school dropouts whose parents had finished high school. Yeah. Now we're on our second generation of high school dropouts where their parents dropped out. Now they're dropping out. And so it's a prevalent problem. So when you can't really blame the parents, because teachers have to teach towards the end of grade testing, and they really don't sit down and teach the kids the way they should, or they sit there. And I know for a fact, I've seen it in action with my kids, where if a little white boy do something in class, the PTA, you go over there, parent involvement. So I'm sitting there, I'm very observant. I just sit there, I'm looking off somewhere, and and white parents go up there with their son. Well, he's not doing that well. He's right there at that edge. He can do better, and I'm going to work hard with him. So I sit back and I wait, I said, okay. So then we get up there, my son, he's like, because my son carried he carried a 78.9 average all the way through high school. I said, man, won't you get your average above a B and get some scholarship money? He was right there. So I'm waiting to hear that. He's right there. I'm going to work with him. It never happened. Year after year. But I told him, don't worry about it, because I know where he was. Because the boy had 100. His IQ test was 135, right, which he was approaching genius. Right. So I'm not worried about him. He was already doing what he needed to do, but he just would not function in the classroom. But that's where our kids are. They're there. But we got to find out what they're good at, and the parents don't know how to do that. And that's why, I'm looking at, and I'm gonna go ahead and, make a long story short. That's why I'm looking at the HBCUs, the Divine Nine, the black organizations, the Masons, the Boule, and all of them, and the black church, especially the black church. I have no problem with prosperity ministry, but we got to start bringing the kids from the hood into church and sitting them down and working with them. Because when it comes to that prosperity ministry, they're like, oh no, they used to sell drugs. Because you remember, the building of the black church in the old days, when people got out of jail, they come in, say, come as you are.
Yeah.
They clean them up and make them deacons. God is the God of redemption. Or if a young lady was out there on the street, crack and drugs and stuff, come on in here, we got you.
Yeah.
But now these churches now like, nah, we don't want those people. Our own people are saying we don't want those people. But I love those people. Because because the only difference between them and me, when I was in prison, I would tell them the only difference between me and him, me and you, I didn't get caught. They said, "Oh wow," we surprised. I said, "Why?" I said, "Usually people say because I'm in the Lord." No, I didn't get caught.
Right.
And so I know what redemption is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we need to find out. That hey, look, no matter what background they have, we can take them to another level. If they make that step, we get these programs in there, the HBCUs, Divine Nine, and the churches all have a major conference here in Wake County and say, we got to stem the tide. We got to turn it back. We got to get these kids together. And they all make a concerted effort. We got pockets of people working, but hey, we got to all come together under one umbrella. Yeah. It was interesting today at my church, Dr. Dumas Hershaw preached. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about Howard Thurman, and he was talking about the hellhounds, how the hellhounds are really sniping at us now, and we cannot live in fear. So I told him today, I said, look, 5 o'clock today, I got to, talk on the program. I think, since you're retired as a pastor, you got the time. All we want to do is pick your brain and get the knowledge and put this thing together, and we push it forward.
Mm-hmm. Let me, you named a lot of little individual groups.
They're not little individuals. They're large.
Large individuals.
Ironically, we talk about, we at war.
Yeah.
Just think, if we had the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah.
And what's happening in Washington, D.C. And I thank God that the Deltas had their convention, I forget what they called it, a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Because they had to have it there now with the National Guard and all them walking through the city with, checkpoints and things of that nature. We would probably have to go up there and fight to get our women out of there.
Well, where I was, the point I was about to get to, and Noble Joe Ali said in one of his writings, don't talk hate on any organizations or groups. But I did want to say that the black church, they're part of, they got to comply, like we were just mentioning earlier.
I'm not talking hate. I'm just telling we need to come on in.
No, you not. And I said I don't want to speak it. That's why what I want to say. But those they're funded. The funds that come through them, they got to comply to certain type of curriculums and all. So I don't see them. Y'all want to add on to how to
you don't see them doing what, man?
How to educate
Come on,
all
man,
the parents.
hey, they need to comply by that.
No, they definitely need to step up and help out in the community.
I'm on the board of a charter school. Mm-hmm. It's funded by the National Heritage Academies. And we're starting this fall in Durham on the corner of Gear Street and Club Boulevard. Mm-hmm. And we have like 600 students coming there. A lot of those come from disenfranchised, franchised families.
Right.
Indigent families. And we know what the mission is. But the thing is, what's beautiful about it is that they know they come in there and there ain't gonna be no cell phones, cussing, running through the halls. Right. And I asked the guy from NHA, how come y'all don't have NHA high schools? He said when you get to the point where you have high schools, it's a different beast. Because the cell phones come in, the bullying come in, the cliques come in, it really cavalcades and then the gangs come in. Yeah. And that's when the school will not have an opportunity to really control it and keep it in there. Because all it takes is a couple of them getting in a couple of incidents and that would just tear down the whole fabric. But when you're up to middle school, then you get your parents buy-in. The parents still have buy-in because you have that gradual scale of influence where the parents have a lot of influence when they're young and it wanes off when they get to the adolescent years. And that's what we're dealing with. We got to catch them while they're young.
You got to get them while they're young.
Yeah, that's why I applaud my brother over here because he got them while they're young. Yeah. Even when I was there the other day, I'm looking at them like, oh man, this is rough. I was like, I was ready to throw my hands up. I testified in church that I have a tough group. But I'm not throwing in the towel
Yeah.
because God has a mission. We are a God that in due season, it may not be my time for them to change or catch on, but long as I plant that seed.
As long as you plant that
Yeah,
seed.
yeah. If I could add on to that question about how, the Department of Education, has failed, our children, family, and communities for decades and decades, over 100 years. I think that really, need to be investigated and looked at for those of us who, work with our children, educate our children. Of course, we do have to catch them when they're young. But, all four of us sitting here today, we're very literate and can comprehend. So that in itself teaches us that the same thing can go for all of our children, because no man is born wise. You have to be taught and instructed. So how are they instructing our children, and what are they teaching our children? And I think that it's an easy target to blame the parents, right? And I think that it's very unfortunate when we even look at the parents, when we had the United States government with the documentation that you're reading from, where they are targeting our communities, our children's, for miseducation, for mass incarceration. When you look at the school to prison pipeline, when you look at how they want to dope our children up, right, to keep them from being functional and being able to lead a life that basically will be successful. When you look at, the school to prison pipeline, and you see all of our, African brothers and sisters that's incarcerated, and we understand that it is by design and a plan, as you clearly stated when you was reading the memorandum from 1978, and also, when you was reading about COINTELPRO. So how can we blame the parents for institutional and systemic racism where we sending our children? How can we blame the parents for white supremacy, right? That's just like blaming our ancestors for the enslavement of our people, right? At some point, we have to hold the government accountable for its actions, right? Because it's one thing to admit, like when they admitted about the FBI and COINTELPRO, but what did they do about it?
That's right.
They didn't do anything about it. It's just like the city of Raleigh, Dr. Kim, my colleague, the resolution 2 years ago about all the atrocities committed against the citizens, the black citizens of Raleigh. They came up with a resolution, but they never came with any type of reparations and things of that nature. You make an apology, but nothing comes with apology, right? So at some point, that's why it's so important for us to organize, like Stokely Carmichael said, like Fred Hampton was doing, the Black Panther Party, organizing, to make sure that our children got a healthy meal before they went to school so that they can focus and learn. The government saw that as a threat, right? Feeding black children is a threat because they don't want the black children to grow up to be healthy, to grow up to be strong, and to fight the injustice, right? Because if these types of things were happening to the white community, the Europeans, we all know, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to blame them for doing what they do if they feel like that's what they need to do. When they stormed Capitol Hill, right, a lot of black people got mad because they said if that was us, they would have shot us. Yeah, they would have. But you got to understand that they was storming it because they felt like the country wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. So if we look at it, who really supposed to be storming the Capitol Hill?
Oh man, we should have
right.
stormed it hundreds of years ago.
See, and people missed the whole thing, right? Because they felt like the government, right, was wrong. I'm not saying they was wrong or right? And who did they blame for that? They blamed Trump for being behind that. And who was the president now? Trump.
Yeah.
He got elected 4 years after. So how can you have a president in office with 34 felonies when yet we can read documentation here showing the corruption in the government, but if we pick up a piece of gum, they'll want to give us 100 years.
Yes. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, it was. And speaking of that systemic racism, school to prison pipeline, which is a diabolical scheme, African American educators, how do y'all feel about them having a certain responsibility to educators?
So, I like to go back to the origins. I like to read their documents. They tell you what their intent is when they created their outline for execution. So we go back and we look and say imperialism. The definition of imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. We always talk in reference to this country as if it was created. No, it's an extension of. An extension of who?
Right.
Now, granted, they had a fight to become independent, but they're the same people.
That's right.
And they're only becoming independent from somebody else's rule.
And they were labeled terrorists.
And they were labeled, yes. So at the end of the day, we're trying to civilize people. We're really just occupied. We're really just managed. So we're forced to teach their language. We're forced to teach their rhetoric. We're forced to teach. When we sign up, we're actually buying into our own enslavement to teach their lie.
That's right.
We're only here to continue the extension of England or Great Britain or their diabolical systems of law. We're not doing anything different. We're just basically an extension of what they have created. So when we start talking about all these great organizations that's doing this or doing that, we can only say regurgitate. Because mind you, none of these great organizations are going back far enough. And I'm going to tell you why I know they're not going back far enough. Because if they really went back, they wouldn't even be associating themselves with teaching our children how to assimilate with European behaviors.
Yes, that's right.
Nobody wants to talk Swahili. Well, that's older than Greek philosophers. How do HBCUs start talking about the Greek language, but we don't want to learn hieroglyphics or anything that the African hands, mind, intelligence created and put in the walls along the Sphinx and the pyramids? Are we not they wanted to study us, and we're here trying to study them. Okay, wait a minute. Are we teaching our children that we are the dominant society? Are we learning how to comply with who are calling themselves superiority? You're not superior if you fry in the sun. And they know this. So again, we have exchanged roles as to who is the dominant character. And now I'm not saying dominant in a form of we have provide oversight to you, because we never wanted to make us more powerful or more dominant or more anything. We were all human. When we came to their countries and shared any of our knowledge, it was to better society.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
When we brought our knowledge, when we brought our astrology, our medicines, our education, it was never to say that we were better than.
Right.
Or we were going to use our knowledge to enslave you.
Right.
Or we would have. Right.
And again, if we do not, first of all, break the cycle of education that has been imposed upon us, our education didn't start here. You cannot teach children how to have dignity when you teach them from a slave mentality. You got to go back.
Great. Yeah.
And you got to tell them that we're greater than the Greeks. Okay, I'm sorry.
Nah, that's beautiful.
If I could chime in, I think it's important when you say you got to go back beyond, and I want to say 1619, the 1619 project, because you're right. You can't start our history here being enslaved, because if you do, you're going to have an enslaved mind. Right now, I think it's important, one of the things, that we teach at KCSSU is the knowledge ourself. Know thyself. The name of this show is Africans United, Know Thyself, Black Power Radio. To know thyself is the main purpose of life, right? That's in our instructions of Shetawatnetic in the Kemetic spiritual system. Shetawatnetic enjoins the main purpose of life is the great awakening, to know thyself, spiritual enlightenment, right? And there's a lot of components that go with the knowledge of self. The first being understanding that we are an African people. We are African, right? So I think that when we look at, some of the HBCUs, unfortunately, we got to look at who basically funded them, right? And even who are some of them named after, right? And then when you look at these, what they consider to be Black Greek organizations, I think it's important for us to understand that there's a difference between Western philosophy, Western psychology, and Greek philosophy falls up under that, as opposed to African philosophy, right? And our philosophy is the philosophy of Maya, right? Which is truth, righteous, justice, balance, order, harmony, reciprocity, right? And when you understand African psychology, is that we are spirit, right? That's our essence. That's the knowledge of self, right? And when I'm talking about spirit, I'm not talking about the individual spirit, the universal spirit, right? So when we start adopting things basically that were anti-African and anti-Black, which Western psychology is, we read about the Papal Bull and how, the Pope, Nicholas V, he was the Pope, right? And how in the Papal Bull, his instructions to Portugal was to go into Africa, right, and enslave anyone who wasn't a Christian. And of course, Africans at that point in time, they were not Christians. They was, basically practicing their traditional spiritual systems, right? So when we understand Western philosophy and Western psychology, when we're talking about a Black Greek, you're talking about taking your consciousness outside of who you really are and adapting the consciousness of those who has harmed your ancestors. So we have to be careful in who's teaching our children and what they're teaching our children. Because the knowledge of self is the basis of all true knowledge, right? And I ask the children this, and this is important, right? What's the strongest part of a tree? And they say the roots. So we go to our roots, because within our African roots are going to be the secrets, the nutrients, and the knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors that's going to propel us forward. I think it's important for us to really understand that African civilization sustained itself for 10, 15, 20, 30,000 years. Here in the United States, this country is barely over 500 years old, right? It's a newborn, right? So we had the opportunity as African people throughout the world, right, to go and Sankofa, retrieve the knowledge of our ancestors. And it's part of the healing process that we had to go through. My Jaden and Baba Akmos, Dr. Elijah Mickle, he came up with this. We go back and we retrieve the knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors to make us strong, right? And then we understand the my Alpha, which was the misery of miseries for us as an African people, going through the transatlantic slave trade, right? We understand that, we deal with that. But then we come to the philosophy of Maya, which is truth, justice, and righteousness. So by understanding the past, we're able to strengthen ourselves and understand what we have to do today to empower our children, empower our communities, empower African people throughout the world. And that's how we start to heal the mind. And one of the things that we really have to be aware of, right? And it's important for us to understand, and this is not to blame any fraternities, sororities, or anybody. We really just coming out of slavery, right? They've done quite a number on us because they had us enslaved over here for over 300 and something years, which is a long time, generation after generation after generation. So we have to be patient with one another, and we have to listen to one another, and we have to understand that we really have to go deep within our spirit and mind to raise our level of consciousness so that we can unite as a people and get these people foot off of our neck, because they're not going to take their foot off our neck until we throw it off.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
And very well said, Brother Sar. As an educator, there should be an outcome. anything that we learn should propel us into a fusion of economies, healthy economies, healthy economics, healthy transitions, because education is always supposed to provide in betterment, because it's, first of all, knowledge by itself. I'm perplexed when I see scores of children yearly graduate. I'm perplexed when I see institutions of law graduate attorneys with less than 1% advocating for civil rights. Even in our black institutions. I did not go to a black institution, quote unquote black. I went to a white institution. Now, I took criminal justice courses. And let me say that the same textbooks that are used in the white institutions are also used as the standard for the black. So my question is, how do you unravel yourself from enslavement if the very textbooks that you use in a white institution are also used equally so? So are we graduating in order to continue or dismantle? Remember, we are at war. So what they do is typically hire you to prepare you to fight with them against your own best interest, which is a form of survival. In order for me to eat, live, pay my mortgage, have status, go and show you on Facebook that I'm traveling, I got the sweater to show it, to prove it. You know, I'm at church and I can say, look at me, look at what God favored. You know, we can start using these little cliches, and we've arrived. But we did so under the auspices of the lie because we have chosen to comply. Again, I can show you dozens and thousands of us who graduate into a system, into an ocean that have swallowed us up in the mere lie of inclusion, when we really should have flipped the table. We actually should have fasted. We should have abstained. We should have boycotted. Where's the institutions that are rewriting what criminal justice is instead of graduating us into the lie?
Right.
Did they even teach us that it's okay to buck the Constitution? That we may not even need it? Is it even for our people?
No.
Or what are we doing? Because that's not education. That's indoctrination. And they've professionalized it and civilized it, sophisticated, put it on a platter, and we're eating it at our own demise.
You know, it's kind of sad. You know, I'm a historian, and we all are talking about indoctrination into the the white supremacy mindset.
Yes.
I'm here to tell you, before Adolf Hitler died, he was a despondent man in despair, and he was hurt because he sent the Germans into Tibet looking for the superior Aryan race, and he found out that the Aryan race was not that superior, because when they came back, they found that there were other countries that were far more advanced than Germany. So basically what he was trying to bring into full fruition was a lie, because Germany wasn't that far ahead of anybody else. If anything, they were behind as far as growth and development is concerned. And that's why if you look at the Raiders of the Lost Ark, they over there in Egypt and places like that. We already know that Alexander the Great and all the Greeks and them went in the house of Luxor, took all this stuff. That's why they burned it. That's why I'm finding out that when they pillage and take everything, they burn stuff down, so you can't find. That's why they burn up Tulsa, Rosewood.
Yeah, come on.
That's why they. So that way, there's no records, because I'm finding out. I'm looking at some property. Then come to find out the county split. When the county split, ironically, the courthouse burned down with the land documents in it. So I'm finding out that's a way of creating a ruse. So when it comes to this white supremacy, I'm finding out we can be the best of the best, because a guy the other day on Facebook was talking about, okay, if you want white supremacy, cut your air conditioning off. Stop using the stoplight, stop using the gas mask, stop using your cell phone. Things that, when it comes to DEI, these are some of the things that these folks, quote unquote, who say are DEI, people that look like us, have invented. You look at the row of inventions, man. Even with the super soaker, something to play with. Hey, come on, you saying with DEI, but if we had been there, you wouldn't have what you had. Look at the astronaut. Armstrong, I forget who it was, who said he, only way that he will fly up to the moon if this latest black lady works on the calculations.
That's right.
Yeah.
The numbers game, and we always been good at the numbers game, because they would not let us learn how to read and write, but we didn't know anything else. We knew the numbers.
Right.
Like that African tribe that can sit back and tell you how many years the stars are going to line up.
Astrology.
The Dungo tribe, the Dungo tribe. Dugon, they ain't have no artificial intelligence. They ain't have no supercomputers. So that lets people know that, hey, look, y'all keep it up.
Yeah.
We outside, and now is our time.
It is.
Right.
Absolutely.
And y'all right, y'all answering my questions that I wanted to ask y'all right there, and because African-centered truth is a must. We understand that. But North Carolina has recently passed a legislation. I think last time Dr. Kim was here, we went over the Senate Bill 227, 558, which actually, what does it state? It says that discriminatory practices or divisive concepts, that's what it's labeling. They changing history. They don't want to teach the history the way, well, it wasn't being taught properly anyway, but now they changing again, and because they saying it's divisive concepts and discriminatory actions, practices. Now, is what's the value of teaching our children true history, about Africa's role in world civilization and humanity, and why must this education also take place outside of the school system? Dr. Sauls, I see you ready. Let's go.
Yeah, man, I'm ready to chop on that, because I grew up in Boston, and it was interesting when I went back to the work. I was working at this company, and this lady's son was in there, and he's Chinese. He was studying. I said, this is Friday. Why are you studying after school on Friday? He says, tomorrow we have Chinese language school. So I started studying to see what was going on. And I said, okay. And then the Jewish people have Sabbath school. Yeah. It's okay. You have your regular school during the week. But on the weekend, you're going to learn what our people went through. Because there was this guy in my 7th grade class. He had his yarmulke on. He went through his bar mitzvah stuff. He was sitting in the back with, he was reading Mein Kampf and the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I'm looking at it like, man, what are you doing? Come to find out, I was went to school in Brighton. So going back to Boston, we had to drive through Brookline. Brookline was the enclave for Jewish people. And he lived there. And so I'm finding out, they tell, before you get through your bar mitzvah, you got to read Mein Kampf and the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And we don't put those demands on our kids.
Right.
Now this is where the parents call us and say, if you don't do anything else, back in the day, we used to have people come around selling encyclopedias. Black folks used to buy encyclopedias.
That's right.
We used to buy that. We used to buy Jet magazine, Ebony magazine.
Yes.
Right.
Then all of a sudden they switched to XXL, them hip hop magazines. All the stuff, all the real stuff left the house, and the bad stuff came in the house. The idol worship and stuff. Where all we were doing was learning what our people are doing. So now we have to get to a system like with my brother here having that Saturday program. That's all we need to do. Keep these Saturday programs going.
Yes.
Tell the other people, get all these organizations, the church, the Divine Nine, the Boule, the Masonic Order, and the HBCUs. You're closed on Saturdays anyway. Open up your gymnasiums to our organizations in our community.
Yes.
Open up your classrooms.
Right.
They're collecting dust on the weekend anyway. Then in your cafeterias, man, won't you give us a luxury? Allow our kids to come to your cafeteria and eat breakfast in the morning, then go and stay in the classroom till 12 o'clock. Then they can go home. See, there are all these different types of support programs we need to put in place. You got to remember, in 1984, when Ronald Reagan got in there, his guy Block went in and said, we're cutting all the after-school programs.
Yes,
they cut all the after-school programs. All of a sudden, when he cut those programs, those kids that could go and get food in the afternoon and also be in the gymnasiums and also be in the ABCD youth training programs, they were turned out into the street. If you really want to when gang violence really, jumped up, that's when it happened. It started in 1984, because now these kids had nowhere to go, and they became latchkey kids. all of a sudden you in the house and you say, hey, some of my boys in the house, and y'all sitting in there. Next thing you know, you start doing things, unsupervised. You start doing some chaotic things, and all of a sudden you start forming your gangs. Then I found out in 1991, I'm reading about John Hopkins. John Hopkins is slick. They had already started studying what happened after 1984, and they had already started publishing papers. And now with these youth gangs, they're not as prevalent, they're not as volatile. Instead, you put a female girl in the middle, and then they start whooping, putting on that war paint, that testosterone, and that's when they start fighting. You're not going to embarrass me in front of this female,
right.
And that's when it just started. It just took to another level. Then the media in Hollywood got involved with that music, with that movie with Tupac in it called Juice, where they were all cool.
Yeah.
Till all of a sudden he got a gun. Once he got the gun, he got the juice, and that's where we at now. We gotta turn that juice into orange juice, watermelon juice, some good juice.
Absolutely.
We gotta put down that lead juice and put down some nutritional juice, some mental juice, and some spiritual juice.
Absolutely.
That's where it's crazy, man, but that's where we at. That's what we gotta do.
If I can add to that, the value. Could you please repeat that question?
What I asked was, outside of school, why must education take place outside of school? And what I was saying was because they passed the bill, new bills to limit the type of history that's being taught.
Right. First, I want to say that the reason they want to limit the history that's being taught is because what I spoke on earlier about Derrick Bell and critical race theory. They got it mixed up. They thought when he was talking about critical race theory that he was talking about history, but he was just talking about how the law impacts African Americans in a negative way, right? So everybody thought that they was going to be teaching the true history of this country and all the atrocities that they committed as far as, murdering the Native Americans and basically, coming over there, capturing us, kidnapping us, and enslaving us. That's why they talk in that bill about being divisive, right? But you teach the truth because the truth is Maya, and that's the philosophy that we live by, in the African community, the philosophy of Maya, truth, justice, and righteousness, right? So when you look at, for instance, a couple of weeks ago when we had Dr. Kim, and you read the Pledge of Allegiance, at the end it says, "In liberty and justice for all." And we all know that that's not true based off of some of the documents that you read and also our experiences, right? So on Saturday mornings at KCSSU, Brother Essence, as you well know, because, we work together every day, we teach the children, and we call it the Rites of Passage program. It's basically like what Dr. Sauls was talking about that the Jews do, right? Because basically, what we want to educate our children on is our high culture. Right, and we start with values of communication and language, the way we speak to one another, right, and customs and courtesies, our thoughts, our manners of interaction with one another. All of these things are high cultural values that we have to teach our children. And then we teach the 10 virtues of a student. Control your thoughts, right? Which is very important. And we take the children through mental exercises, like, breathing techniques, meditation, being able to identify a good thought from a bad thought. Understanding we got to let the bad thought lead because your thoughts precedes your actions. Number 2, control your actions. Number 3, have a purpose. Number 4, have faith in your teacher's ability to lead you on the path of truth. Number 5, have faith in your ability to accept the truth. Number 6, have the ability to act with wisdom. Number 7, freedom from resentment under the act of persecution. Number 8, freedom from resentment under the experience of being wrong. Number 9, have the ability to know right from wrong. And number 10, have the ability to know the real from the unreal. These are high principles and virtues that we teach the children so they can get in tune with their thoughts. And for yourself, Brother Essence, when we on the bus, a lot of times, if a child do something, Another child might say you're not controlling your thoughts or you're not controlling your actions.
Yes.
So the seeds are being planted, right? And also we teach on Shetawat Netta. We teach the value of the black woman, the first teacher, right? Always honor the black woman, whether it's your mother, your sister, your daughter, your aunt, your grandmother, right? Because that's our first teacher, right? And we teach the boys to also respect one another. We are not the N-word, right? I'm very appalled and disappointed in so many of us who want to use the term YNs because we think that that's cute and trendy. But what we're doing is putting a target on our young brothers and sisters' back. And not only that, we're not the N-word. That is not who we are. We are African people, right? And this is what we're teaching the children, the knowledge of self, so that they'll be strong and understand what we have to do to continue in this war that we're in. As Dr. Kim is always talking about, we're at war. And we are at war. So we don't properly educate our children and train them in the knowledge of self, because they'll be grown before we can snap our fingers. Because I can remember 25, 30 years ago like it was yesterday.
Yes.
So it is so important that we give our children the proper education. Educate them on this government, right? But see, this is the great thing that I really like about our organization, Brother Essence. And not only Brother Essence, Dr. Sauls and Dr. Kim, because all of us work together.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And that is that we understand what we have to do in order to challenge this system so that this problem doesn't exist 60 years ago. 60 years ago, Malcolm X was murdered for fighting for us. Right? And then when we look at, 6 years ago, when Fred Hampton was murdered, and the problem has not gotten better. It has gotten worse. Right? And we can look at Chicago and see how it has gotten worse. Not only Chicago, wherever we are on this planet, right? And this is not to blame the citizens, right? This is for us to understand, right, as leaders in the community, right, what we have to do as far as organizing so that we can stamp out white supremacy, because that is our enemy. I'll never forget when I was in federal prison reading The Final Call and Winnie Mandela, right, and strong queen, Mother Africa. And she said, don't ever stop fighting white supremacy. She said, fight it with every ounce of fiber that you have in your body and in your spirit. And that is exactly what we have to do. We have to organize. We have to come together. We have to challenge the system, not to join it, but to create a whole new system by doing away with the Constitution.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Stokely Carmichael, or known now as Kwame Toure, he said that some people join the movement to join the system, and some join the movement to change and create a whole new unbiased system. Those are two different approaches. We still have that going on today. I have a two-part question here. First, which approach do you feel is better for us? And secondly, are those two philosophies in opposition with each other, or can they coexist? I'd like to get the full panel.
Well, I'll start off. Yes, indeed. And basically, that was what I had just stated before you asked the question. And that is, a lot of people, they think that the system is okay and that it can be tweaked a little bit and everybody's going to have justice, right? You have a lot of people, a lot of, African professionals, they might be in, law enforcement, or they might be in education, or they might be in the medical field. And that's, how they basically make their living and survive is through the system. So, they know that the system is messed up. They won't quite call it corrupt the way we will, but they will say that it needs a little fixing and tweaking, right? And those are the ones who they join the movement, to join the system. Not to speak negatively, anyone who basically has transitioned, but a perfect example of that is someone like John Lewis, who ended up being, in politics. You have others like, Al Sharpton and things of that nature. But then you had the real revolutionaries, right? The real revolutionists, like Malcolm X and Fred Hampton, Kwame Toure, Huey P. Newton, and they understand that in order to have a system that's going to be, just, that you have to destroy a system whose foundation is corrupt. when we know that this whole system and its whole foundation is built off of not only what they did to the natives here, by murdering over 20-something million of them, but also what they have done to us and what they continue to do to us and what they continue to do to the Native Americans, right? So it's so important for us to understand that, and that's where the problem come in with a lot of our organizations, right? Because we'll be in the same room and we won't understand who wants a whole new system, a whole new government, and those who think that the government is okay, right? Because you have some, like, everyone who Dr. Kim named, basically, like the county manager, the county sheriff, the county commissioner, right? And a lot of these are black people, but they think that the system is okay because they work with the system. And then you got revolutionaries like those of us who are in here. We're in the same room, but we're fighting for two different things. Right, and so that way it's hard to make progress, right? But it's also important to understand the ones that they murder are the ones that they want a whole new system, right? And even taking it to Africa, the coup d'etats, right? They're always the ones they put in power who side with the enemy, the lackeys of the enemy. And I think that that's important because a lot of times when some of us who want to join the system, we become lackeys for the system. And when they see brothers and sisters like us trying to create and change the system to have a whole newer system, they'll fight against us, which stops us from making progress, right? And I think that the solution to that is the knowledge of self, right? Because once we start getting the knowledge of self, we understand that we have to put each other first and foremost.
Can I also just piggyback off what the brother said when we start talking about knowing self? Once you know yourself, you can rightly discern what an enemy looks like. The problem is you can't call out an enemy if you don't know who you are in the midst of what you're dealing with. And, oftentimes I never call this a country. I call it a corporation.
Right.
And if you recall, a couple of years back, our Supreme Court said that corporations could vote. Now I'm going to let you all let that sink in.
Right.
We get battled for trying to vote, but when you have corporations who have more power, matter of fact, it said that corporations were declared people. Am I right when I said that? They were persons.
Corporations?
Corporations were declared a person. Now I know
your brand, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they made it so that you could send all your money to that person so that they could have more power in voting. Because their money was going to carry the vote. It was going to purchase everybody else's. It was going to buy out everybody else. So now they're playing the game based off of how they are defining themselves. Today, we tried to argue with them that we were a person. For 400 years, we were property.
Right.
Once we became finally a person, now we are equal to a corporation. Okay, come on, y'all.
Yeah.
So at every turn, it's about who's defining who and defining what. And that's why I say that you cannot call this a country. You have to call it what it really is.
It's a republic.
It most certainly is. And they have declared who they want to be a part of that organism versus, and we're only just sort of trying to be a part or be included. I tell people all the time, you the one went six months of traveling to a whole nother continent to bring me. I think I'm already included, don't you think? The problem is, how are we functioning? How are we functioning as a people? Are we functioning as second-class humans? Not second-class citizens. Second-class humans. Are we living in a third world? Are we living third world in a quote-unquote first world country? When you let them tell you they're going to give you affordable housing. 400 years? And all we amount to now all we can afford in this country is affordable
Affordable
housing
And renting at that.
and renting.
Renting at that, right?
Again, until we see ourselves as something better than what they are defining, we're always going to get slim pickings. And so, again, when we talk about education or just the power structure in itself, we're going to have to stop chasing their definition of who we are.
Yeah.
That's the first issue, is that we're going to have to declare ourselves sovereign outside of this,
Talk to him.
sovereign outside of being, quote unquote, an American. I don't need to be an American for you to treat me as a human.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I'm waiting on that, I may need to come to the grips that we may not never get it. And it's okay.
Well, the seeds have to be planted because it's interesting. If you look at Burkina Faso with Captain Ibrahim Traore, he's doing a great monumental work. And just recently, they were allowed to go to the grave site of Thomas Sankara. Right. And when you were talking about, are you going to be part of the problem, or are you going to get rid of the problem? What was interesting, because if you look at the history of Thomas Sankara, once he rose to power, it was his best friend that killed him. And Thomas Sankara's father kept asking him, "Did you kill my son?" He said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." He finally came out and told his dad, "Yes, I killed your son," so he can take the power. It's like anything else, man. Even what we're doing today, the people out there might say, "Yeah, I like what they're doing." Let them get the work out the way, then I'll come in and take over. Right. That's why it's one of those things, we got to start with the grassroots, with the children. That's that next generation. Plant those seeds and work them through the system and rely on God in time to get it to that point where it's going to take over. Because it's not going to be, it may not be in our time. And now might not be the time, because there's always a fire. Because it's just like with Christmas Adams dying, the first person to die, American Revolution. Was a black man, Christmas Addicts. Right. But they're just now telling the story. Oh, there was a black guy ride with Paul Revere. Right. All of a sudden this stuff is coming out. We're looking like what? Because you got to remember, up until I think it was 1814, there was no such thing as slavery. Yeah. Because I found out my family, the Sauls name is Scottish, because in 1748, a white man from Scotland, married a black woman, in the Eldris, and started, the Sauls clan. And then when it comes to education, you go down, you type in Caleb Sauls. He fought against, CB Aycock in the early 1900s to establish a Rosenwald school right there in Greene County. It's on the Sauls farm. So now it's still there. So now we find out that it's got to be a situation where we got to start setting traditions, and everybody can't leave the home house. Everybody can't leave the area, because that when we have a devoid of history, because the oral traditions aren't being passed down, because we don't have large families anymore. We have what we call dinks, double income, no kids. Hey, look, I'm making all this money, big house, traveling all over the world, as a sister said, but you ain't got no children. The government gonna get your wealth back due to the tax laws. Right. If you didn't have any kids, your brother and sister have no kids, where your future going? That's why I've always been an advocate of black folks having families. I've had girls come to me while they're in college. I'm like, "Dr. Sauls, I'm pregnant. What do you think I should do?" I said, "You talk to God, because that's between you and God. God don't make no mistakes. That baby will be taken care of. We get back to the village. That baby gonna be okay." That's right. Wow. It's because it's about how the life you live.
That's good.
That's great information right there. I love the way he made those points right there. I'm sad to say, man, we down to our final minute. I'm sad to say that. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask you all. We need to come back and continue this, because I had a few more questions that I did want to get out there. I wanted to go over with.
May I say something, bro?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think it would be a great thing, for us to continue this discussion, because like you say, you got a few more questions for us, but also it was some statements by Dr. Sauls and Dr. Kim that I think that we can really build on next week, right? Because, we covered a lot, like you said, but it's a lot more to be covered. Back to you, brother.
In closing, I want to say tonight, family, we've walked through history, truth, and vision. We've looked at how systems, educational, political, and social, have worked against us, but we've also remembered the blueprint left by those who came before us. A special thanks to the Honorable Brother Asa, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Sauls for these wisdom and deep knowledge. But let's be clear, this is not where the conversation ends. The real work begins when we take what we've learned tonight and put it in motion. This means controlling our own education, owning our economies, defending our communities, and shaping our own narratives. Where we go from here? The answer is forward. Forward with unity, forward with knowledge and discipline, and forward with the spirit of our ancestors walking with us. Until next time, know thyself, love your people, and walk in Black Power. This is Africans United, Know Thyself Black Power Radio, where Black consciousness is not just talked about, it's lived. Remember, proper education always corrects error. Peace.
Peace.